exam qualifiers, and I wanted to do a quick review of the new Mountain Goats album that came out a couple weeks ago called Goths. I've been a Mountain Goats fan for probably going on 7 or 8 years now, which is rather amazing because there hasn't been any part of my life where I've decided to take a break from the Mountain Goats. Instead, what I've been doing as a fan this whole time is going through their back catalog and really seeing how they developed and how they progressed as a band. Starting from in the 90s, when their frontman John Darnielle was making these odd little lo-fi acoustic recordings, and his albums were full of these strange, short, disconnected songs with this really intense imagery where you were never quite sure what was going on in these songs, but they gave you a feeling. And then later into the 2000s, when John started experimenting with narrative and with concept albums, and you've got what I would consider sort of the masterpieces of Mountain Goat's career, like Tallahassee, which is tied together by a really strong Southern Gothic mood, and it shows that the Mountain Goats clearly have a love for this genre, and describes this very dysfunctional relationship between two people in the middle of nowhere in Florida, which on one hand is over the top and melodramatic in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, but also has moments where it is genuinely heartbreaking and very painful to listen to. And then in the 2000s, I noticed the Mountain Goats shifting again, away from these strictly narrative albums which followed one protagonist, and towards these looser connections of stories with different characters that were all held together by some kind of overarching theme or mood or feeling, like the album Beat the Champ, which was a series of loosely connected vignettes about local underground wrestlers, some real, some fictional. But really the theme of the album was power, and how wrestlers can feel so powerful inside the ring while they're fighting someone, but how ultimately the endless series of competitions and being trapped in a world where you have to fight people over and over again can eventually grind you down and make you feel powerless. And while I did think that both of these albums were really interesting, both lyrically and stylistically, I was a little bit worried because I felt like they were scattershot, especially their last two albums, Transcendental Youth and Beat the Champ. It seemed like Mountain Goats were showing some growing pains. Not only did the music on Beat the Champ sound kind of all over the place, some songs were very experimental, other songs sounded like things the Mountain Goats had been doing for years, but the musical choices that they made and the risks they decided to take didn't always mesh well with the content of the album, with the stories that this album was trying to tell, especially when they leaned more towards laid-back, jazzy tones in the instrumentals with really clean, really polished production that just didn't fit with these stories that were often very intense, gritty, and in the moment. The music had some kind of detachment or distance that just did not come out in the writing. Even when the instrumentation did get a little louder and did get a little faster to match the intensity of the lyrics, it never really gained any real grit or weight to reflect the down and dirty nature of the subject matter on this album. I did feel like overall, Beat the Champ was a little bit of an inconsistent listen, and I was hoping that on their next album, the Mountain Goats would commit fully to a new sound, a new style, and if it was required, a new set of lyrics or subject matter that would fit that new style. And I think with Goths, I think they've done it. The music on this album, it's very cavernous, it's very mysterious. There is a natural flow to these instrumentals that I don't think that we've seen on the Mountain Goats album for a while now. They progress incredibly organically throughout the course of these songs. The mix is no longer as busy and the production is no longer as clean as it used to be. There's a little bit more mystery and weight to this instrumentation. The lyrics here, I think they match the more polished and more intricate instrumentals. John Darnielle and the Mountain Goats, they've always kind of written songs that have grabbed you by the throat and thrust you into some kind of scene where a character is having some kind of strong emotion. They've always been kind of a gut punch band, and while I do think that this album is very emotional, it seems like there's a little bit more perspective or context to the stories that John Darnielle is telling on this album. It is no longer thrusting you into the head of someone who's very overwhelmed and just kind of leaving the listener to their own devices to pick up what they can about the situation that's going on. Instead, the narrators here seem to have a little bit more distance or detachment from the intense emotions that the songs are often speaking on. Maybe they have gone through a really hard time in their lives and are now looking back on it, or looking back on the passion they used to have for the goth subculture. So there's a certain wisdom and experience to these narratives that we haven't really seen before, I think, in a John Darnielle album. Kind of a duality going on here in this album, I think, between how seriously some of these narrators take themselves or have taken themselves in the past, the passion of people who are involved in the goth subculture, and their tendency to maybe over-dramatize certain things, and the distance that the narrators or protagonists, or just John Darnielle himself, has in these songs, and the little bit of humor and experience he's able to inject into some of these narratives. In a way, I think that the goth scene is the perfect subject for this album, because I think that the goth scene itself has this kind of duality going on in it. That on one hand, the goth scene takes itself very seriously as a way to face up to and deal with really difficult topics like death, and on the other hand, the goth scene acknowledges that it is kind of melodramatic and it has a playful side to it, where it is just really fun to dress up in black and use dark imagery. Like on the song for the Portuguese goth metal bands, which is this real homage to the Portuguese goth metal bands, who are portrayed as these really serious, dedicated goth luminaries who are doing things like pulling these ideas for songs from the mouth of graves and guts out onto microphones, and the imagery gets really intense and really melodramatic. But John Darnielle is able to pull us down and ground us with lines about how, for example, these bands are also headlining really big festivals every other summer in Brazil. These little reminders that as much as goth culture lifts up and romanticizes or glorifies these musicians, they are real people who live in the real world. They are not these magical hermits. And these acknowledgments, these very quick, witty asides, really make this album what it is. Like the song Abandoned Flesh is another great example of John Darnielle's humor on this album, where I assumed that the song was going to be some kind of intense meditation on death or time, especially because it's the last song on this album. But what it really is a song about the breakup of the goth band Gene Loves Jezebel, and about how they've been forgotten by the world. And even though the song is kind of tongue-in-cheek, totally over the top, it's a dryly humorous song, there are these hints and snatches of John Darnielle taking this idea that a band breaking up would be this devastating event in someone's life, or then a band being forgotten in this case, pretty seriously. Like when he says that because Gene Loves Jezebel has been forgotten by the world, that you and me and all of us are gonna have to get a job. While this line seems a little bit silly at first, The way he says it is a little bit melancholy. Like, because this band that meant so much to so many people has been forgotten, that art in general, and especially, I guess, art in a certain subculture, like the goth subculture, is not going to be acknowledged and appreciated by the world, and that people who live in this subculture and who it's really important to have to find another way to interact with the world. They have to leave this behind. This idea of your youthful passions gaining less significance or just different significance over the course of your life, learning to live in the normal real world without a subculture that provided so much of your identity when you were young is a big theme of this album. Like in Paid in Cocaine, which is about this formerly famous lead singer of a goth band who describes these days of being in a goth band, being in that culture, as some of the happiest of his life. Describes getting totally swept up in the energy of the concerts, in the passion of his fans, but at the same time recognizing that he wouldn't really want to go back to those years because they were confusing and overwhelming, and because they led to a tragedy in which one of the members of his band died of an overdose on stage. There's a stark melancholy to this song that is really pronounced in the lyrics, and I think that the instrumental doesn't quite do justice to. There are these really bright, peppy, and clean horns that come in on the chorus, and I think this is one of the few examples on this album of John Darnielle going back to the sound that he was playing with on Transcendental Youth, on Beat the Champ, where all the instruments have to be super bright, super clean, all have to be at the front of the mix, and I don't think it does this song any favors. I think it makes this song seem more upbeat and more lightweight than it really is in its lyrical content. But fortunately, I do think that he avoids this misstep on most of the other songs on the album. For the Portuguese goth metal bands is a totally beautiful ballad, which has this subtle, complex drum and bass work that underscores the whole song, very steady, very rhythmic, and these piano grace notes that just come in at just the right times. It really reminds me, with the subtle and complex grooves, of something that Death Cab for Cutie would have done in like their early years. It reminds me a little bit of maybe that song No Joy in Mudville, or some of the other things on We Know the Facts and We're Voting Yes. The intricacy of the rhythms in this song and the depth of the mix carries on over to a lot of the other songs on this album, like Shelved, which might be the most instrumentally complex song the Mountain Goats have ever released, which has this guttural, tense drum and bass groove going on underneath it, and these really pure, clean piano notes on top. And the song is about a musician who's maybe been written off by the music industry. It's thought that he's too old, not with the times, running out of ideas, but he's not going to let himself be shelved. And the panic underlying the song, the high-strung uncertainty, is really palpable. It's maybe one of the most legitimately nerve-wracking songs the Mountain Goats have ever released, but at the same time, it is kind of triumphant, saying that I will not be written off, I will not be condemned to the past. I also love the song Wear Black, which takes wearing black, which is, kind of a trope or a stereotype of goth culture, and makes it into something personal and something very intimate. There are these warm, inviting piano chords all over this song. It's a very soulful song, very beautiful. I also want to quickly mention the song, which I think I'm gonna get wrong, but I'm gonna try, The Grey King and His Silver Flame Attunements. Okay, I think I got it right. which also has really wonderful drum and bass interplay going on in the background, and an undulating horn which punctuates the song's most dramatic points. It kind of flows in and out, and it ends up sounding very mysterious. Also, I think that John Darnielle here has a little bit of reverb on top of his voice, which just adds to the hugeness, grandness, melodrama of this song. I love the slight vocal effects that are on John's voice on this album. Overall, I'm very impressed with Goths. I think it's the best thing the Mountain Goats have done in a while. I don't want to give it a score like from 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 because I've never done a music review before, and I feel like people wouldn't have anything to compare that score to. You couldn't put it in any kind of context. So instead, I'm just going to say that if you are a Mountain Goats fan, I think you'll probably really enjoy this. And even if you're not, it is worth checking out, especially if you are a fan of interesting, complex, emotional indie rock. I would say that this could be an album for you. And if you are a goth fan, well, a lot of this music doesn't quite sound like a goth music, but the aesthetic is there, so I think you might appreciate this too. That's pretty much it. Have a great day. I hope that I can make some more music reviews soon and get them out and see how people like them. But I'll see you later. Bye.